Jessica never believed in ghost stories. Every time her classmates whispered about haunted houses or cursed woods, she laughed, always rational. Fear to her was only a trick of the mind. So when the challenge came a dare to spend an entire night inside Freetown Forest, she didn't hesitate. She smirked, crossed her arms, and said yes. To her, it was just a patch of trees, nothing more. Legends were for children, and she was determined to prove she was above that nonsense. The forest, however, was not ordinary. People in the town spoke of shadows that walked without bodies, of screams that echoed through the branches at night, of people who entered and never returned. They said the ground itself held memories of rituals and names whispered by voices with no mouths. But Jessica brushed it aside. She told herself she would laugh the hardest when she came back in the morning, but nothing to report but silence and cold air. Her friends had gathered near the trail, flashlights in their hands, nervous giggles on their lips. They watched as Jessica adjusted her backpack. "Don't let the ghost bite," one teased, though her eyes betrayed a hint of fear. Jessica smirked. "I'll send you a selfie at midnight so you know I'm alive." She winked, then turned toward the path that led into the trees. The gravel crunched under her shoes, and with each step the world behind her seemed to fall further away. The air shifted almost instantly. It was cooler here, heavier, as though the branches had woven too thick for sunlight. Jessica ignored the shiver crawling up her arms. She kept walking, pretending not to notice how quickly her friends' laughter had faded, swallowed by the forest silence. Soon, even the faint hum of traffic from the distant road was gone. It was just her, the path, and the endless wall of trees pressing close on either side. She thought of the stories she had overheard, hunters who vanished, pale figures drifting between trunks, black stones buried beneath the soil. She laughed again, softly, but this time her voice felt too loud. It echoed strangely, as if the trees themselves were listening. "It's only stories," she whispered. "Just stories," but the forest seemed to lean closer. Jessica reached a clearing where the grass had grown wild and tangled. She set down her bag, pulling out a flashlight. Though daylight still lingered, the shadows stretched long, bending with shapes that didn't quite match the branches above. She rubbed her eyes, blinking them away, but the unease stayed. Part of her wondered if her classmates had come here before, carving strange signs on the trees to spook her. The idea made her grin. If they thought they could frighten her, they'd chosen the wrong girl. She sat on a fallen log, sipping water, listening. The forest gave nothing back but a strange weight. She checked her phone, still a signal, though weak. She typed a quick message, asterisk made it. "Forest is boring, see you in the morning," asterisk. A few emojis popped up in reply, and that gave her comfort. The world outside wasn't gone, not yet. The minutes stretched into hours. She tried reading from the book she'd brought, but her eyes kept sliding toward the tree line, where the dark thickened like ink. Sometimes she thought she heard something, a rustle, a footstep, the faint crack of a branch, but when she lifted her flashlight, there was nothing, only trees, silent and unmoving. "It's animals," she said, forcing a smile. When the last light of day sank away, the forest revealed its true face. The sky was gone, hidden beneath a ceiling of branches. Her fire, small and uncertain, gave a fragile circle of safety beyond. The dark seemed to breathe. Jessica curled her knees to her chest, staring into the black. She thought of the people who had dared the same challenge before her. How many had walked back smiling, saying, "See, nothing happened," not enough to quiet the whispers. Midnight crept closer. Jessica checked her phone again, ready to take the promised selfie. She held it up, grinning wide, but when she looked at the screen, the shadows behind her seemed thicker, almost shaped like figures. Her smile faltered. She snapped the picture anyway, then sent it with a caption, asterisk still alive, asterisk this time. No one replied. The signal had vanished. She set it down, telling herself she didn't care. She was fine. She was strong. She was brave. But the silence pressed harder now, heavier, like an ocean above her head. And in that silence, Jessica finally admitted something she had never allowed before. She was afraid, not of ghosts, not of curses, but of the possibility she had been wrong all along, that the forest was not empty, that it had been waiting.
The tires of Jessica's car crunched along the narrow dirt road, each bump and dip rattling through the steering wheel. The headlights stretched thin beams into the dark, barely piercing the curtain of trees that pressed close on either side. Branches arched overhead like skeletal fingers, twisting together into shapes that resembled hands reaching down, eager to pull her deeper. She gripped the wheel tighter, her knuckles pale, though she reminded herself it was only a road, only trees, only shadows. Still, the longer she drove, the more it felt as if the forest was closing in around her, the path narrowing, the air thickening. The outside world, the chatter of her friends, the lights of the town, even the faint hum of traffic, had vanished. There was only the steady growl of her engine and the rhythm of her own breath. The road wound deeper, twisting left, then right, then doubling back as though it had been designed to confuse. The trees grew older here, their trunks wide and gnarled, bark split and scarred as if something had clawed at them long ago. Her headlights caught the white flash of fungus clinging to the wood, like eyes that blinked before disappearing back into the dark. The air smelled damp, rich with moss and earth, but beneath it lingered something faintly metallic, like rust or dried blood. Jessica rolled down her window for fresh air, but the silence that poured in was heavier than the stale air inside. Not even the chirp of an insect broke it. No owls called, no leaves rustled. The stillness pressed into her ears until she thought she could hear her own pulse thudding. She quickly rolled the window up again, trying to shake off the unease curling in her chest. Her phone lay on the passenger seat, its screen dark. She picked it up at a stop in the road, hoping for a bar of service. But there was nothing, not a flicker. The digital world had dropped away the moment she entered the forest, as if she had crossed an invisible border into a place where signals didn't belong. With a muttered curse, she tossed it back onto the seat, telling herself it didn't matter. She didn't need it. This was all part of the dare, and she was still in control. The headlights suddenly flashed across, something pale and thin that dangled over the road. She slammed on the brakes, hard hammering, until she realized it was only a branch, stripped of bark, swinging slightly in the night air. It scraped the roof of her car as she inched forward, the sound like fingernails dragged across metal. She tried to laugh, but the sound caught in her throat. Deeper still, the forest seemed endless, stretching in all directions, a black ocean of trunks and branches. She thought she saw movement once or twice, a figure slipping between the trees, a shadow darting across the road. But each time her headlights revealed only emptiness. She gripped the wheel tighter, whispering under her breath, "Just trees, just trees." The road grew rougher, narrower, until the dirt path felt more like a tunnel. Branches clawed at the sides of the car, leaving thin white scratches on the paint. She leaned forward, peering through the glass smeared with streaks of mud. It was as if the forest didn't want her to pass, as if it was testing her resolve, but she pressed on, jaw set, because turning back now would mean admitting fear, and she refused to give her classmates the satisfaction. Minutes stretched, and the sameness of the trees blurred her sense of time. She couldn't tell if she'd been driving for 20 minutes or 2 hours. Her headlights illuminated only more of the same. Bark, branches, dirt. It was hypnotic. The road pulling her deeper in a slow spiral she couldn't escape. The silence swelled until she felt smothered by it, her chest heavy with the weight of air, too still to breathe. Finally, the road dipped into a hollow where the trees grew so close together, their limbs intertwined, forming an arch overhead. For a moment, she hesitated. The shape of it was too deliberate, like a gateway. The air was colder here, the ground darker, and something inside her whispered to stop. but she pressed her foot on the gas, forcing the car beneath the arch. The branches scraped across the roof again, louder this time, a chorus of wooden fingers raking above her head. She clenched her teeth and drove on, refusing to look in the mirrors. When the tunnel ended, she slowed the car to a crawl. Ahead of her, the road seemed to dissolve into mist, a gray sheet drifting low across the ground. Beyond it was only shadow. She realized then that the sound of her engine was the only noise left, the last tether to the world outside. The forest had swallowed everything else. Even her thoughts felt muffled, as though they too belonged to the darkness pressing in. Jessica took a deep breath, forcing her shoulders to relax. "It's nothing," she whispered to herself. But the whisper felt small, devoured instantly by the silence. She reached forward, turned up the music on her radio, hoping for a burst of sound. Instead, only static filled the car, hissing sharp and uneven, fading in and out like distant breathing. She clicked it off, her stomach twisting. Static was worse than silence. The road narrowed again, and she followed it deeper still, headlights straining against the black. Her eyes burned from staring too hard. Her hands ached from gripping the wheel. Every instinct told her to stop, to turn around. But her pride was stronger. She had promised herself she wouldn't fail this dare. So she drove on, deeper into the waiting dark, until the night swallowed the world behind her completely. Jessica parked her car at the side of the narrowing road, its tires sinking slightly into the damp soil. The engine ticked as it cooled, each sound loud against the suffocating silence. She stepped out, her flashlight cutting a narrow blade of light through the darkness. The forest seemed denser here, the trees older, their trunks swollen and twisted, their roots clutching the ground like claws. She moved cautiously, her shoes crunching over damp leaves. The beam of her flashlight swept across the trees, and that was when she saw it, the carvings. At first, they looked like careless graffiti, but as she came closer, her stomach tightened. Circles etched into the bark, overlapping triangles, spirals that wound inward until they vanished into a single point. Some were shallow scratches, but others had been cut deep, the wounds still oozing with thick sap that glistened under her light. It slid down the bark in slow drops, shining red in the glow, as though the trees themselves were bleeding. Jessica reached out without thinking, her fingers hovering inches above the sticky surface. The smell hit her before she touched it, a sharp, resinous tang mixed with something sour, almost metallic. She pulled her hand back quickly, wiping her palm on her jeans, though she hadn't touched a thing. The flashlight trembled slightly in her grasp, and she scolded herself for letting her imagination twist something so ordinary into something sinister. Yet the symbols weren't random. The longer she stared, the more deliberate they appeared. Some lined up perfectly between separate trees, as if forming a pattern too large to see from where she stood. Others repeated in clusters, like fragments of language written across bark instead of paper. She tried to convince herself it was the work of vandals or bored kids, but there was precision in those lines, a patience that didn't feel human. Her breath fogged in the beam of her light as she stepped farther down the path. More carvings appeared, marked on nearly every trunk. Some looked fresh, the cuts sharp and raw, the sap flowing freely. Others had grown old, the scars blackened and swollen, yet still recognizable. Time had not erased them. The forest had carried these wounds for years, maybe longer. Some symbols looked like crude eyes, carved pupils staring unblinking from the bark. One trunk bore a pattern that reminded her of a human figure, arms outstretched, head bowed, its body drawn as a single line that bled sap from every angle. Jessica turned away quickly, her skin crawling. The forest seemed alive with hidden messages she could not read, a secret language written in pain. She whispered aloud, "Who would do this?" But her own voice startled her, too loud, bouncing back from the trees. She swallowed, lowering her tone, as if afraid the carvings themselves might be listening. A drop of sap fell from one of the cuts onto the ground, with a sound too heavy for something so small. Jessica's heart jumped, her body stiff. She glanced around, suddenly sure she wasn't alone. The flashlight darted from tree to tree, catching only more twisted symbols, more dripping wounds. The silence pressed harder, thicker, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for her next move. Her flashlight flickered once and steadied. For a moment, the beam caught a spiral carved so deep. The center seemed to vanish into blackness. She blinked, swore it had shifted, like the spiral was still turning, pulling her gaze inward. Her chest tightened until she forced herself to look away. Her skin prickled, every hair on her arms standing upright. The longer she stayed, the stronger the sensation grew, until it felt like invisible eyes tracked her every step. She pulled her jacket tight around her shoulders and forced herself to keep walking. Stopping here would only make the fear worse. The path narrowed, funneling her deeper between marked trees. A damp chill clung to the air, carrying the faintest suggestion of a whisper. She froze, listening, but the sound vanished, leaving only her heart pounding in her ears. She pressed forward quickly, her steps uneven, breath shallow. More patterns revealed themselves, rings interlocked across different trunks, spirals cut so wide they seemed to wrap around the trees. In one clearing, she found 3 trees marked with the same symbol, a triangle enclosing a circle, cut deep, sap dripping in perfect lines. They stood in formation, like sentinels, guarding something unseen. By the time she reached another break in the trail, her body trembled. She turned in a slow circle, her flashlight sweeping over the endless trees, everyone scarred and bleeding. Her lips parted as though she might call out for someone, anyone, but no words came. Deep inside, Jessica realized this wasn't just vandalism or superstition. The forest was marked for a reason, and whatever had carved these symbols had not finished. Jessica stood frozen in the circle of her weak flashlight, surrounded by carvings that seemed to watch her every move. The silence was unbearable, so complete it rang in her ears. She turned, ready to retreat toward her car, when something shifted in the distance. Not a sound, not a shape, light. It glimmered faintly between the trees, a pale yellow glow, soft and steady. Jessica's breath caught. It was nothing like the harsh beam of her flashlight. This light swayed gently, as though carried by an unseen hand, bobbing like an old lantern in the windless night. It shimmered in the darkness, where no source should exist, beckoning silently. For the first time since arriving, Jessica felt less alone, though the sensation was not relief. It was dread, laced with fragile hope. Her flashlight seemed dimmer compared to that distant glow. Against her better judgment, her feet moved. The crunch of her steps over dead leaves echoed louder than she expected, each one answering the faint light ahead. She whispered, "Hello," but her voice was devoured instantly, swallowed by the forest. The glow gave no reply, only drifted farther. She hesitated, then followed, compelled by a force she couldn't name. The deeper she went, the stranger the forest became. Branches arched overhead like ribs, shadows stretching into warped fingers. Her own light quivered, its beam trembling across endless trunks. Yet the glow remained steady, sliding smoothly through the trees. Each time she thought she was close enough to reach it, it slipped ahead, always a few paces out of reach. Jessica quickened her pace, weaving between roots and rocks. Her jacket snagged on bark, her hair caught on twigs, but she hardly noticed. Her eyes locked on that glow, desperate not to lose it. The light grew brighter when she hurried, then dimmed again, like it responded to her. She could not tell if it was guiding her toward something, or luring her deeper where she should not go. Her lungs burned, and still, she pressed forward. Sweat chilled on her back despite the cold night air. The forest floor felt uneven, as though it shifted subtly beneath her weight. Every so often she glanced around, but the carvings were gone here. The trees stood bare. No symbols, no wounds, only dark trunks crowding closer together. It should have been a relief, but it wasn't. The absence of marks felt wrong, like stepping into a blank page after chapters written in blood. The glow flickered. Jessica stumbled, heart leaping, afraid it would vanish. Her flashlight jittered, and for one dizzying second, both beams of light collided. She thought she saw a figure holding the glow, its outline tall and indistinct. But then the image dissolved, leaving only the bobbing lantern light again. She blinked furiously, unsure if her eyes had betrayed her, or if the forest had revealed something it shouldn't. "Wait," she whispered, breath ragged. Her plea sounded pathetic, but she couldn't stop. She half ran now, her shoes slipping in damp soil. The light weaved smoothly, unhurried, as though taunting her with its calm pace. Her pulse roared in her ears, matching her stumbling steps. She hated herself for chasing it, hated the way her body disobeyed her mind's warnings. Every instinct screamed to stop, yet she kept going. Then, without warning, the glow faltered. It dimmed as though a gust of unseen wind passed over it. Jessica lunged forward, desperate, as the light dwindled further, shrinking to a dying spark. "No!" Her voice cracked in panic. Her outstretched hand grasped only cold air. One final flicker, then the glow snapped out. Darkness collapsed around her, absolute and suffocating. Her flashlight sputtered once before steadying weakly, but its narrow beam felt pathetic after chasing such brilliance. Jessica turned in a frantic circle, but the glow was gone. No trace, no path, nothing. Only the endless black forest waiting silently. The weight of her isolation pressed harder than ever. She realized with a jolt that she had no idea where she was anymore. The road, the carvings, even her car. They might as well have been swallowed whole by the woods. Her breath came fast, too loud in the stillness. She tried to call out again, but the sound broke in her throat, thin and useless. Around her the dark seemed to listen. Leaves rustled though no wind stirred, and the cold pressed closer, squeezing her ribs as if the forest itself had hands. She thought she heard something shift behind her, a faint scrape like a boot on gravel. But when she spun around, there was nothing, only endless trees. The silence thickened. Jessica clutched her flashlight tighter, willing its beam not to die. She longed to run back, but which way was back? Every direction looked the same, each trunk another black pillar in a maze that stretched forever. Panic swelled in her chest, choking. She had followed the light too far. Now there was no light and no way out. Jessica stood frozen, her breath jagged, her flashlight beam a trembling blade against the dark. The forest pressed close around her, suffocating and endless. Then it began, soft at first, so faint she thought it might be wind. But there was no wind. The sound was different, sharper, too deliberate. A whisper. She spun, heart slamming, but no one was there. The whisper came again, low and broken, words she couldn't make out. Her skin prickled. Then another voice joined it, overlapping, cracked like glass. Then another, and another. Soon the air was alive with them, countless murmurs weaving together, curling through the trees like smoke. They spoke in fragments, some too faint to understand, others too close, brushing her ears. Her name, that was what she heard. Jess, Jessa, Jessica. The way they said it was wrong, drawn out like breath seeping from a dying throat. Each voice was different, male, female, old, young. They layered over one another until her name was stretched into an endless chant, dissolving into itself and reforming again. She slapped her hands over her ears, but the sound drilled through her palms, vibrating inside her skull. Her flashlight shook in her grip, the beam scattering over trunks that now looked like faces frozen in silent screams. The whispers filled every space between them, surrounding her. When she tried to move, her knees buckled. The ground felt unstable, like it might drop her into the earth itself. "Stop it," she gasped, her own voice barely more than a plea. "Stop saying my name." But the forest answered with a wave of laughter. No, not laughter, but whispers bent into something cruel, twisting into tones that mocked her. She could almost pick out sentences now, short, jagged pieces. "Come with us, don't fight. Open the way." None of it made sense, but each syllable clawed deeper, pulling her mind thin. Jessica stumbled forward, fighting the weight of the noise. Her boots dragged through leaves that no longer sounded natural. They scraped and snapped like brittle bones. The whispers clung to her ears, sliding cold words across her skin. Sometimes she thought she recognized them. Her mother's voice, a teacher from long ago, a friend who had died years before. They blended with strangers' tones, familiar and alien at once. A choir of stolen voices that knew her too well. Her chest tightened, heartbeat hammering like a drum inside her ribs. Sweat slicked her palms, nearly slipping the flashlight from her grasp. She could not hear her own thoughts anymore. They drowned beneath the chorus, until she wasn't too sure if she wanted them to stop, or if she already belonged to them. Jessica, Jessica. They dragged the name longer, stretching it into groans that scraped against her sanity. She tried to scream, but the cry fractured halfway, swallowed before it reached the trees. The forest shifted. She felt it in her bones. Shadows swayed, though nothing moved, and the whispers changed rhythm, no longer random, but pulsing like a ritual chant. They rose, then fell together, sometimes swelling into a moan that rattled her chest, sometimes thinning into a hiss like steam. The ground vibrated faintly as if answering. Jessica's legs buckled. She crouched, clutching her head, rocking like a child. She whispered back, begging them to leave her alone, but her voice was just another thread woven into the song. Her flashlight beam darted over shapes that seemed closer now. Knots in bark turned into eyes, branches curved like arms reaching down. She shut her eyes, but the darkness inside was worse. In the black behind her lids, she saw faces, mouths opening wide, teeth gleaming, all of them whispering her name in unison. She tore her eyes open again, with a sob. Silence fell. Instant. Crushing. Her pulse thundered in her ears, louder than anything. Jessica held her breath, too afraid even to exhale. The absence of sound was more terrifying than the storm of voices. She turned slowly, light jittering across the trees. No whispers, no movement. Only the thick black forest pretending it had never spoken. Her knees trembled as she tried to rise. For a heartbeat she thought she was safe, that maybe she had imagined it all. She almost laughed, the sound brittle, half hysterical. Relief swelled, until it was shattered. Right behind her ear, as close as lips to skin, came a single voice, low and steady, carrying the weight of all the others. Jessica. Her scream ripped the silence apart. The cry burst raw from her throat, echoing across the trees. But the forest gave nothing back. The sound was hers alone, small and breakable, already devoured by the waiting dark. Cold air scraped her lungs, each breath like knives, and she wished with sudden desperation she had never agreed to the dare, had never come here at all. Jessica's scream dwindled into ragged sobs, the sound brittle and thin. The forest swallowed it whole, giving nothing back. She staggered, her chest heaving, her light swinging in wild arcs across the trees. Her throat burned raw, and for the first time since stepping into the woods, she realized how utterly alone she was. The world beyond the forest felt erased. There was only her weak light, and the dark that wanted to smother her. She tried to steady herself, whispering that it wasn't real, that the voices had been tricks of her mind. Yet even as she muttered, she knew she was lying. The whispers had known her name. They had known her. That truth gnawed at her until she felt hollow, a vessel waiting to be filled by whatever was moving through this place. Her boots scraped along the narrow path as she forced herself forward, each step reluctant. The silence pressed heavier than the whispers had, an emptiness that felt alive, listening. Jessica fought the urge to look behind her, because she knew, without reason, without doubt, that something would be there if she turned. Her flashlight beam flicked across roots, rocks, and twisted trunks. Then, at the edge of its reach, the light brushed something else, a shape, a figure. Jessica froze. It stood in the middle of the path ahead, impossibly tall, its head nearly brushing the overhanging branches. It was blacker than the dark around it, a silhouette carved from absence itself. No details, no face, just a hollow void in the form of a man. Yet she felt its gaze pierce her, sharp and merciless, as if invisible eyes were carving into her skin. Her pulse thundered. She wanted to run, but her legs locked stiff. She forced her trembling hand to lift the light higher, desperate to see. The beam wavered, catching the edges of the thing. For a heartbeat, the dark seemed to ripple, pulling at the corners of reality. The faceless head tilted, a slow, unnatural movement that made her gut twist. The shadow seemed endless, taller with every blink, stretching higher than the trees, then shrinking back to man-size again, as if it could not decide what shape it wanted to wear. The air around it shivered, a cold draft sliding over Jessica's skin. She could smell something faint, iron, smoke, and rot. Her stomach churned as the odor thickened, clinging to her nostrils. Then the figure stepped sideways. Its limbs were too long, bending wrong, sliding across the path in a motion that was both graceful and broken. She gasped, stumbling back, nearly dropping the light. It did not make a sound. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, the usual rustle of leaves gone. The thing carried silence like a cloak, and every step deepened it. Jessica raised the flashlight higher, her breath whistling sharp between her teeth. "Stay back," she whispered, though she doubted the thing could understand or care. The words were less a command than a prayer, fragile and desperate. The beam struck it full on, and in that instant, the shadow dissolved. No burst, no blur, only gone, like mist scattered by a breeze. The path ahead was empty, bare dirt and trees swaying gently as if nothing had ever been there. But Jessica knew better. She had felt its presence scrape her bones. Her knees weakened and she sagged against a tree trunk, gripping the bark until it cut her palms. Her light trembled over the vacant trail. She wanted to believe she had imagined it, that stress and fear had conjured a phantom, but the raw sting of dread in her chest told her otherwise. She had seen something, and it had seen her. The silence stretched, heavy and endless. Jessica dared not move. Her whole body shook, a quiver she couldn't stop, as if the shadow's cold had seeped into her blood. The taste of metal coated her tongue. Her ears strained for any sound, footsteps, a breath, even the hated whispers. But nothing came, only stillness. That was worse. When she finally gathered the courage to walk again, her body moved on instinct alone, trembling and clumsy. Each step felt stolen, as if she was trespassing where no living thing was allowed. The forest watched her. She could feel it. 1,000 unseen eyes hidden in the bark and branches, all waiting for her to slip. Every rustle of her jacket, every crunch of her boots sounded too loud, shouted against the void. Jessica swallowed hard, forcing herself forward. She told herself the shadow was gone, but her skin knew better. The air still pulsed with its absence, the way the night feels after lightning has flashed. A memory burned into the dark. She knew it could return. She knew it was not finished with her. Jessica's legs carried her onward, though every step was heavier than the last. The path narrowed, then widened suddenly into a clearing she hadn't expected. For a moment, she thought she had escaped the trees, but what lay before her was worse than the darkness behind. At the center of the clearing was a circle, black stones, scorched and cracked, arranged with precision. The earth within was burned, the soil hardened as if fire had licked it again and again. Ash clung to the edges, and in the middle, scattered like dice from a cruel hand, were bones. Jessica froze. Her light quivered across pale shapes, first animal, then unmistakably human. A rib cage broken open, a skull with teeth still grinning, finger bones curled like claws. She pressed a hand to her mouth, but the stench reached her anyway, thick, cloying, a blend of rot and smoke that coated her tongue and dragged bile up her throat. She staggered closer despite herself, as if pulled. The circle seemed to demand it. Her light caught shards of something dark between the bones, not just ash but melted wax. Twisted stubs of black candles sunk into the ground. Symbols etched into the stones themselves glistened faintly, lines sharp and deliberate. She couldn't recognize them, yet they filled her with dread, shapes that spoke of rituals meant to bind or summon. Her knees weakened. She imagined people here, standing in the dark with the firelight, flickering over their faces, chanting words she couldn't understand, voices rising as something answered from the shadows. She imagined the bones, once belonging to those who had stood inside the circle, sacrificed or left behind, their flesh peeled by flames. The clearing still echoed with their absence. The night seemed colder here. A thin mist clung to the ground, carrying with it the metallic stink of old blood. Even the wind refused to cross the circle, dying at its edges as if the place devoured sound and air alike. Jessica swore the stars above it looked dimmer, swallowed by something blacker than night. Her stomach heaved. She bent forward, gagging, barely able to hold down the sour rush of vomit burning her throat. She wiped her mouth with a shaking hand, her light trembling across the remains. The stones seemed to hum, or maybe it was her pulse roaring in her ears. Still, she thought she heard faint echoes, a memory of chanting clinging to the air. She saw shadows of fire where there were none, flickers of orange and red, painting the trunks at the edge of her vision. She blinked hard, but the after images remained, silhouettes of hooded figures swaying in rhythm, hands raised toward something she dared not imagine. Jessica's skin crawled. Her instincts screamed that the circle was not just memory, but door, still open, still hungry. She felt as though stepping too close would draw her inside, and the stones would close around her like teeth. The thought sent her stumbling back, desperate to escape its reach. But her boot struck something brittle. A bone snapped under her weight with a sharp crack. The sound split the silence like a gunshot. She froze, horrified, the echo racing out into the trees. The clearing answered with a stillness so deep it hurt. Even her breaths seemed unwelcome. The skulls grinned wider in her imagination, hollow sockets glistening as though wet. She swore she saw one jaw twitch, a fraction of a movement, as though trying to speak. The smell thickened, crawling into her nostrils until she felt suffocated by rot. Her eyes watered. She pressed her sleeve against her face to block it, but the stench came from within, not without. Her legs shook violently. She wanted to run, but the clearing held her fast, like invisible chains. She whispered, a broken plea, I shouldn't be here. Oh God, I shouldn't be here. Her voice sounded small, devoured before it could rise. The stones seemed to lean inward, the circle tightening, as if acknowledging her words. Her light wavered one last time across the bones. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw them shift, as if stirred by a breath that wasn't hers. The ash trembled faintly, or maybe her eyes were playing tricks. Either way, the clearing no longer felt abandoned. It felt awake. Jessica turned away with a strangled sob, stumbling toward the trees again, desperate to escape the circle's reach. Yet the forest she re-entered was not the same. The air pressed heavy against her skin. The smell of ash and blood clung to her hair, and every shadow seemed thicker than before. She heard faint cracks of branches behind her, like careful footsteps that stopped whenever she stopped. Her pulse pounded in her ears as realization struck. She had not left the circle behind. It had come with her, a mark burned into her presence, a reminder that some doors, once seen, never truly close. Jessica's breath tore through her chest as she pressed deeper into Freetown forest, each step swallowed by darkness and twisting roots. The trees loomed tall and identical, their branches arching overhead like clawed hands, shadows flickering with the weak beam of her flashlight. Every path seemed to fold back on itself, looping endlessly, while the stench of the burnt circle and decayed soil clung to her clothes and skin, crawling beneath it. like invisible insects. She forced herself not to look back, though the prickling along her spine and the tingling at her neck told her she was not alone. Suddenly a scream exploded across the forest, shattering the oppressive silence. It came in layers, raw and jagged, piercing through bone and marrow, echoing off the trees and reverberating through the ground beneath her feet. Jessica staggered, almost collapsing as the sound wrapped around her, vibrating her skull, rattling her teeth. Her chest heaved, lungs burning, her heart pounding like a drum in the silence between shrieks. The scream was alive, a monstrous entity that seemed to chase her, twisting through the trunks and branches, bouncing back into hearers from all directions, vibrating every nerve in her body, as though the forest itself were alive. She raised her hands to cover her ears, but it did no good. The sound was inside her head, digging into every thought, her vision blurred, tears streaming as each breath became a fight. Every nerve screamed in unison with the chorus, which carried fragments of pleading voices, men, women, children, intertwined with something darker. It was not just a scream, it was pain, agony, and warning. Someone, or something, was being torn apart, and Jessica felt the creeping terror that she could be next. The sound rolled over her like waves, each echo shaking the leaves and making the air vibrate cold against her skin. She stumbled forward, tripping over roots and loose stones, only to find herself again facing the same gnarled trees. Branches clawed at her face, scraping her arms, while the flashlight swung wildly, casting erratic shadows that twisted like living things. Each step led her back to familiar stumps, logs, and carved symbols in the bark, mocking her attempt to escape. The ground quivered beneath her feet, as though the forest itself were breathing, pulsing in rhythm with the scream. Leaves rustled without wind, and the silence of the hidden wildlife heightened the oppressive weight pressing on her chest. Her head throbbed violently, ears ringing with the high-pitched wail that refused to soften. She tasted copper on her tongue, a metallic tang that stung her mouth, her nose smarting as though blood might flow at any moment. Her hands trembled, knees quivered, yet the scream never eased. It layered itself upon itself, growing, bouncing, folding around her like a living cage. Every cry, every echo seemed to steal pieces of her, twisting them into the chorus. She tried to call out, but her voice was swallowed, replayed in the scream, making her feel as if the forest had claimed her. Her panic grew as she realized she might never escape, and dread curled around her like a living thing. Memories of her friends flashed across her mind, their laughter when she accepted the dare, the mocking glint in their eyes, her own smirk at thinking the forest harmless. Regret and fear merged, burning through her chest, but she could not stop. The forest only collected, and it wanted her fear. The twisted maze of roots, mud, and broken paths seemed infinite. Every stump she marked, every log she used to orient herself, vanished or repeated in new, impossible patterns. The chorus dipped briefly into a low moan, like buried laughter, then surged again, and Jessica's own name cut through it. Jessica. Her muscles quaked under exhaustion, yet she scrambled forward. The beam of her flashlight slipped from her fingers, casting wild, spinning shadows. She pressed herself to the ground, hands clutching her head. But even as she screamed, her voice was absorbed, rejoined into the eternal howl of the forest. Panic and despair wrapped around her like chains. Branches swayed though no wind blew. The soil beneath pulsed like a heartbeat. Dry leaves fell in slow, deliberate patterns, and the forest seemed to lean in closer, pressing its presence, absorbing her terror. The scream reshaped itself into chains around her body, around her mind. Jessica knew with a shudder that chilled every fiber of her being that she was not just lost. She was trapped. Her voice, her fear, her very existence were held hostage by the forest, which would not let her go. Nothing remained outside the scream. Nothing remained of Jessica at all. Jessica stumbled through the thick undergrowth, every fiber of her body trembling from exhaustion and fear. The forest seemed to close in around her, the shadows growing darker, more defined, as if the trees themselves were leaning closer to watch. The echoing chorus of screams had faded slightly, but in its place came a different kind of terror, a suffocating silent pressure that pressed against her chest and made each breath feel heavy, like air had thickened into lead. The damp, earthy smell of the forest mingled with the metallic tang of her own sweat, and every leaf that cracked beneath her feet sounded impossibly loud, sending shivers through her trembling body. Then she saw them, glowing red eyes appearing between the trunks and branches, one by one, hundreds, maybe thousands, staring directly at her. They did not blink. They did not move, but their gaze pierced her like needles, each pair burning into her mind. Her stomach clenched and her limbs froze, hair standing on end as cold dread ran down her spine. Some eyes were low to the ground, others high in the branches, all focused on her. Her flashlight trembled in her hand, casting shadows that only seemed to give the eyes more prominence, reflecting back her own terror in a cruel imitation of life. A cold breeze brushed her face, carrying the scent of wet soil, and her skin prickled, her hair standing on end. She tried to speak, to scream, but no sound came out, swallowed by the oppressive silence that followed the eye's appearance. The forest around her seemed to hold its breath, waiting, watching. Every instinct told her to run, but even moving felt dangerous. She could feel the eyes tracking her every twitch, every step. The trees themselves seemed alive, their branches snaking toward her, curling and twisting like fingers, as if the forest itself were part of the watching. Each step made the mud squish beneath her boots, every leaf brushing against her trembling skin, reinforcing the sensation of being observed. Her hands shook, and every muscle in her body tensed as though bracing for an invisible strike. The longer she stared, the more eyes appeared. They multiplied, emerging from shadows she had thought empty moments before. Some hung at impossible angles, perched unnaturally on trunks and branches, glowing in the dark, reflecting her panic back at her. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared it would give her away, a beacon for whatever watched her. Each rapid pulse echoed in her ears like a drumbeat, synchronized with the silent, all-consuming gaze. Her thoughts raced, panic twisting through her mind, the forest pressing on every sense. Jessica stumbled backward, her foot catching on a root, sending her sprawling into the mud. Her flashlight clattered to the ground, rolling to illuminate a group of eyes set low to the ground, glowing like coals. They did not move, did not blink. She realized then with horror that these were not animals. They were something else entirely, older, patient, aware. A whisper brushed against her ears. Not words, just the sound of acknowledgement. The forest confirming her presence. She scrambled to her feet, but the eyes followed. Wherever she turned, new eyes appeared, filling every gap, every shadow. The forest had become a cathedral of red lights, a congregation of silent observers, and she was the lone prey at its center. Fear twisted in her stomach, paralyzing her momentarily. The echoes of screams from before mingled with this new horror, layering over her mind and sanity until she felt the forest itself pressing against her thoughts, weighing them down. Every rustle, every distant crack, amplifying the terror in her chest. Her legs finally moved, propelling her forward as fast as they could. But the forest seemed endless, the eyes always there. They multiplied with each frantic step, until the forest was alive with their gaze, and she realized she could not escape. Not by running, not by hiding, not by crying out. Every path, every branch, every shadow was watching. She was alone, trapped, and every red eye in the forest knew it. Her skin prickled, her scalp tingled, every nerve bristling with a terror she could not escape. She stumbled again, the mud sucking at her boots, branches tearing at her clothes and skin, the oppressive gaze never letting up. Sweat and blood mixed on her skin, and panic clawed at her mind. Every breath was shallow, every step calculated. She felt the presence of countless observers, each one patiently marking her movements, as if measuring her for something unseen. The red gaze did not waver. It waited, patient, calculating. And Jessica, trembling, soaked with the sweat and mud, realized that no path, no motion, no sound would free her from their sight. She was entirely within the forest's gaze, utterly trapped, and utterly alone. Jessica's legs burned and trembled as she sprinted deeper into the suffocating, oppressive darkness of Freetown Forest. Every step sank into thick, slick mud or twisted around hidden roots, tearing painfully at her ankles and knees, slowing her frantic flight. The red eyes she had glimpsed earlier now multiplied, emerging from every shadow, every tangled branch, every hollow, reflecting her terror back at her in cruel, unblinking patterns. The damp air clung to her skin and clothes, heavy with the stench of wet earth, decaying leaves, and a metallic tang of blood. Her chest heaved violently, lungs burning with each ragged breath, yet she could not slow. Hesitation meant certain death under the forest's relentless, watchful gaze. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves, echoed like whispers from countless unseen watchers, pressing down with invisible weight, whispering her name in tones both familiar and alien, crawling along her spine like ice, setting every nerve on edge. Her foot caught on a concealed root, and she was sent tumbling forward into a shallow pit, masked by wet leaves and mud. Pain lanced through her arms and legs as she hit the cold, sticky ground, her hands and knees scraping against jagged roots. Her flashlight spun away, leaving her in near total darkness, save for the faint, relentless glow of the red eyes now surrounding her completely. Shivering violently, her hands brushed against something matted and revolting, tangled, greasy human hair. Her stomach lurched violently as she lifted it, revealing a skull partially covered in decaying skin, its hollow sockets glaring at her as if alive. The stench of rot rose in suffocating waves, mingling with mud, sweat, and metallic blood, making her gag. Mud slid from her trembling fingers as she recoiled, her body trembling in fear, bile rising, breath catching in short, panicked gasps. And every hair on her body stood on end. Branches overhead arched like clawed hands, scratching her arms and face as she scrambled backward, slipping repeatedly in the mud. The red eyes shifted, emerging from shadows that moments ago had seemed empty, glowing with patient, malevolent intent. Her heart hammered, muscles tensed, nerves screaming. Each breath burned her lungs. Each exhale seemed swallowed by the forest's oppressive silence. The pit pressed down on her chest like a living weight, and the forest itself seemed to lean closer, alive with ancient, predatory intent. Her scalp pricked, hair plastered to her forehead, and every fiber of her being screamed that she was trapped, measured, hunted. Desperation drove her forward as she clawed along roots and mud, hands raw and bleeding, body shaking uncontrollably. The red eyes multiplied further, hundreds now, filling every shadow and hollow, merging into writhing, impossible forms. The forest whispered her name in broken, overlapping tones. Jessa, Jessica. That rang in her ears, scattering her thoughts. Panic and adrenaline collided, propelling her forward, even as her mind screamed that escape was impossible. Regret clawed at her. Why had she dared enter this place? Fear, guilt, and raw survival instinct drove her onward, muscles burning, body trembling, hands slipping in mud, fingers raw and scraped by jagged roots. Every snap of a twig, every creak of a branch felt magnified, pressing down, measuring her, mocking her. She felt as though the forest itself breathed around her, alive, patient, and ancient. Finally, she heaved herself up over the pit's edge, palms raw and bleeding, boots slick with mud. She staggered, trembling violently, drenched in sweat and grime, muscles screaming in protest. The red eyes continued their unblinking surveillance, merging with shadows into forms her mind could barely comprehend. The forest seemed alive, pressing down from all sides, patient, ancient, calculating. Every nerve burned, every heartbeat thundered, and she knew with chilling certainty that escape might be impossible. Trapped, utterly alone, entirely within the forest's merciless, unyielding gaze. Her body trembled, her mind screamed, yet instinct pushed her forward, driven by fear, raw survival, and the knowledge that stopping now meant surrender to the forest's hungry, watching shadows. The sound of snapping twigs, rustling leaves, faint sibilant whispers, and the distant creak of rotting branches pressed in from every direction, echoing in her mind as if the forest itself were alive, mocking her, measuring every motion, every gasp, every tremor of panic, confirming that she was not just lost, but hunted in a place older and darker than any nightmare she had ever imagined, a place that wanted her very soul. Jessica's legs were burning, each step a sharp reminder of her exhaustion. Her every breath felt like she was sucking in more thick, suffocating air. The forest seemed to close in around her, growing darker and more oppressive with each passing second. The mud sucked at her boots, threatening to drag her down, while the sharp branches scraped against her arms, tearing at her clothes and skin. The weight of Freetown forest was pressing down on her shoulders, its unseen forces pushing her deeper into its abyss. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears, thundering louder than the whispers that followed her every step. She could hear them now, soft, insistent murmurs, growing more distinct. Jessa, Jessica. The voices were distant, but close, coming from every direction, circling around her like vultures. Every repetition of her name felt like a weight on her chest, an invisible hand squeezing the air from her lungs. The words, her name, twisted and stretched like a mocking chant that was pulling her deeper into madness. The flashlight in her hand flickered erratically, its weak beam casting fleeting shadows across the trees. Her vision was distorted, the dark forest seeming to twist and warp as if it were alive. The red eyes were everywhere, glowing in the darkness, watching her, waiting. Each time she turned, they followed, multiplying like stars in the night sky, unblinking, unyielding. The whispers turned into a cacophony, growing louder with each step she took. The wind seemed to carry them, whirling around her, making it impossible to tell where they were coming from. "Jessica, Jessica," they whispered, now urgent, desperate. The forest had a voice, and it was calling for her, pulling her deeper into its sinister heart. Her feet slipped in the mud, and she fell hard onto the ground. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs, leaving her gasping for air as the wet earth pressed against her face. For a moment, she couldn't move. She lay there, trembling, her body screaming for rest, her mind a jumbled mess of fear and desperation. But she couldn't stay still. She couldn't stop. She pushed herself up, hands trembling as she wiped the dirt from her eyes, trying to clear her vision. "Keep moving," she whispered to herself, her voice shaking with fear and exhaustion. "Just keep moving." She stumbled forward, her legs heavy and uncooperative, each step a battle against the gravity that seemed to be pulling her down into the earth. The red eyes were closer now, glowing brighter, surrounding her. They blinked in and out of existence, their malevolent gaze fixed on her every move. The trees whispered their names to her, their voices like a cold wind wrapping around her skin. She could feel them now, feel the presence of the creatures that lurked just out of sight, moving alongside her, always just a step behind. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest, her lungs burning with every ragged breath. But there was no escape. She couldn't stop. She couldn't let them win. She was running blindly now, not even sure where she was going. Every path seemed to wind in on itself, leading her in circles. The trees looked the same, their trunks thick and gnarled, their branches stretching high above, twisting into strange shapes. The sky above was a shroud of black, and the stars were hidden, as if the universe itself had turned its back on her. The chanting grew louder, more urgent. "Jessica, Jessica, Jess." The trees seemed to echo the words, their branches reaching down as if to grab her, to pull her deeper into the forest. The very air seemed to vibrate with the sound of her name, reverberating in her skull, threatening to drive her mad. But ahead, she saw it, a flicker of light, soft but undeniable. Hope flared in her chest, fragile as a candle flame. A clearing, a safe place, perhaps. Or was it just another trick of the darkness? She pushed herself harder, her legs protesting with every movement. But the light seemed so close, yet so far away. She stumbled forward, gasping, her body on the verge of collapse. But as she neared the clearing, the trees shifted again, closing in around her, blocking her path. The light was snuffed out as quickly as it had appeared. The forest had swallowed it whole, and now there was nothing but the overwhelming, choking blackness. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she fell once more. But this time, she did not rise immediately. The weight of the darkness was too much, pulling her down, filling her with dread. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her vision blurring at the edges. The laughter, high-pitched, mocking, echoed in her ears. "Jessica," it whispered, soft and sweet, but full of menace. "Jessica." She was running out of time. She had to move. The chase was on, and there was nowhere left to hide. The silence pressed on Jessica like a suffocating weight. The forest around her was eerily still. The whispers, the glowing eyes, and the distant laughter were gone, leaving behind only a dead quiet that seemed to swallow everything. She thought she had escaped, convinced herself that she was free, but deep down, fear still clung to her. Something was wrong. Something was watching her. Every step she took seemed to drag her deeper into the darkness. The earth beneath her feet was soft and damp, as though the forest itself wanted to consume her. She stumbled, her legs heavy, as if the very air had turned thick with dread. The trees loomed overhead, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, clawing at her as if they too wanted her to stay. Her breath grew shallow and quick as she struggled to move, but no matter which way she turned, it all felt the same. The forest was alive and aware of her presence. She felt its gaze, its hunger, and she knew, deep in her bones, that it wasn't done with her. Then, out of nowhere, something moved in the shadows, a flicker, a blur. Her heart skipped a beat. Jessica spun around, but there was nothing. No figure, no sound. Just the rustling of the leaves and the soft groaning of the trees in the wind. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. She wasn't alone. Then came the first real pain, a sharp tug at her ankle, yanking her off balance. She cried out, but the sound was muffled in the thick air. The ground beneath her was soft, like quicksand pulling at her. She fought to free herself, but it was as if the forest was grabbing hold of her, pulling her deeper into its grasp. Her body slammed into the ground, her vision blurring. She tried to push herself up, but her arms felt weak, useless. The dirt around her was damp, sticky, and as she tried to claw her way out, she realized with horror that the earth seemed to be pulling her in. Her hands sank deeper into the soil, and the more she struggled, the more the ground seemed to swallow her. Panic surged through her. Her heart pounded in her chest as she gasped for air, her body covered in a cold sweat. She couldn't move. The ground had her. She was stuck. Something was coming for her, something she couldn't see but could feel. The air had grown chilled, heavy with the presence of something otherworldly. Then she heard it. A growl, low and guttural. It vibrated through the trees, filling the air around her. She whipped her head around, her eyes scanning the shadows, but there was nothing visible. Just the trees. Just the darkness. The growl came again, louder this time, and she knew it wasn't from any animal. It was something ancient, primal, something that had lived in the forest for longer than she could comprehend. The trees were moving now, their branches swaying, bending, almost as if they were alive. Her body trembled in terror as the whispers returned, only now they were more distinct, louder, clearer. "We've been waiting for you, Jessica." The voice was soft, velvet-like, but it was filled with malice. It wrapped around her like a cold, suffocating fog. She looked around, but all she could see were the shadows, growing darker by the second. Then she felt it, cold fingers brushing against her arm. Her heart skipped a beat as she spun around, but there was nothing there. Nothing except the trees. The figure stepped out from the shadows, and Jessica froze in place. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form almost formless, just a shadow in the shape of a man. Its eyes glowed red, reflecting a cold, empty hunger. And its voice was a whisper that scraped at her very soul. "You belong to us now, Jessica." Before she could react, the darkness closed in around her. The figure moved closer, its shadow engulfing her. The last thing she heard was the whisper right against her ear, cold as death. You cannot escape. Days later, hikers found Jessica's phone lying at the edge of the forest. The screen flickered, showing her face, pale and filled with terror. Her voice, barely audible, crackled through the speaker. Don't let them in. Don't let them find you. The phone slipped from their hands as the screen went black. Jessica was never found. But as they walked away, one of them swore they heard something. A faint whisper. It sounded like Jessica's voice, calling from the depths of the forest. Don't let them in. The wind seemed to carry the whisper further, and for a moment, the trees themselves seemed to respond, their branches creaking like an answer. The forest had claimed her, and it waited for the next. Every year, more came to Freetown Forest, drawn by its mysteries. But those who ventured too deep never returned. Some say Jessica's spirit still roams the forest, searching for someone to join her. The whispers grow louder each year, and the wind carries her voice. Don't let them find you. But no one listens. No one ever listens.